Hey guys, welcome to Drawing with Abby. In today's video, we're going to be doing a draw along in my Samsung S22 Ultra in Clip Studio Paint. Now this is actually part 2 of a video that I posted a week earlier. In that video, I covered the sketching stage of what you see here. In this video, we're just going to be focusing on the inking phase of this drawing. Now to start off with, you saw I created a new layer in Clip Studio Paint. I lowered the opacity of the original sketch layer and started drawing on top with my new layer. To start off with, I'm using the G pen that comes default with Clip Studio Paint. I will later on in the drawing switch over to a bunch of custom brushes for more textured look. But to begin with, I want to start off with a pen that has some clean line quality for us to work with, and then we can start building textures and more shadows and more shapes with some of the other brushes that we have. Now, at this stage of the drawing, I'm really just focused on the quality of my lines. And what I mean by that is making my lines look smooth and as confident as possible. The things that you'll notice when I'm drawing is that I'm not too concerned about overlapping lines or creating tangents at this stage, because I'm more focused on the line quality than I am about making the lines perfect in the illustrations. So what do I mean by line quality? What is it I'm looking for? Well, to be honest, what I'm really looking at is the thick and thin of the line, if it's communicating any sort of shape or communicating what's closer to me as the viewer versus farther away, how smooth those lines are. One of the big things that I see when I look at some professional work is that, those smooth, crisp lines really do communicate that you're working at a higher professional level versus just a hobbyist enthusiast level. So I try to replicate that or strive for that in my own illustration. I mean, you can see it here in this sunglass portion of the illustration that I'm using really choppy lines because I'm really exploring the shapes here rather than illustrating or polishing the lines of the sunglasses. If I had done a better job at the sketch stage and really worked out these shapes, then I wouldn't be using these choppy, hesitant lines. Instead, I'd be focusing on more confident, bold lines. One thing I want to point out to what I'm doing right now is I'm working on the finer details of the face. So one of the things I do when I'm working on more fine detail is that I immediately bring down my brush size so I can get in those finer details. But it's also really important to make sure that when you are switching your brush sizes in your illustrations, that you're consistent on the brush sizes for certain parts of the illustrations. For example, if I start off using a large brush to detail the lines on the jacket, for example, then I'm going to want to stay at that brush size for as long as possible or as consistently as possible, just so it looks like I'm working with the same line weight and that the material that I'm communicating with my lines feel consistent to that particular part of the drawing. Versus if I'm doing fine details, let's say on the belts or on the face, I want to make sure I'm using the same brush sizes for those aspects of the drawing. So you can see here that I've switched over to some of the custom brushes that I've installed into my mobile version of Clip Studio Paint. I'm using the Daub paint brush pack. I'll leave a link in the description below, so if you guys want to check it out, feel free. Just a quick heads up, that is a paid brush pack, so just fair warning there. So I'm using this chalky brush to build up some texture on the jacket. I'm trying to convey that this is a leather jacket, so maybe the light is a little bit diffuse versus more of a shiny latex jacket. This is more of like a matte black jacket. So I want to, just sort of hint at that bumpy texture to the surface of the jacket. And the best way to do that is to use a brush that has a lot of distressed elements to it. And so you'll see me switching back and forth with a couple of chalk or distorted or naturalistic brushes to sort of build up that texture. Now, for the most part, when I'm inking, I kind of want to use a brush that's like set at 100% opacity, so I get those clean, crisp lines, and I really don't want the opacity of the brush to have too much of an impact on it. However, when I'm applying texture, I really do want it to leverage the pen pressure sensitivity of the device and try to build in some sort of softer looks. So here you can see that I've switched my brush yet again, but instead of applying inks to it, I've switched to a transparent brush so I can start shaping some of those textures and those looks and feels. So I'll be switching back and forth with the same brush, with the same brush size, with using full black inks or transparent pixels in order to build up those shapes, to build up that sense of lighting within that jacket. So that's exactly what you guys are seeing me do right here. Just refining those shapes using the initial lines that I used with the first G pen that I used at the start of this drawing to inform where those creases are in the jacket, where some of my lighting should be in the jacket. But again, using that brush, using the transparency feature in Clip Studio Paint with the brush to build up onto those elements, and again, really try to sell the texture of the jacket. So here's something that I love to do with digital inks is in a moment you'll see that I'll switch back to my G pen, and I'm going to reduce my brush size to something even smaller than the original brush size I used to create the outlines on the nose and the face. And that's because I love using these smaller scratchy lines to build up some textures on the face. Just because if I were to use a brush that was a little bit thicker and tried to use the same lines, it would just come across as a little too harsh. Whereas when I use sort of this finer brush size and I'm hatching away at the face, it comes across as a little bit more delicate, a little bit more organic, and just a little less harsh than if I were to use a thicker brush. So it's something that you'll see me do often, especially on areas like the face. However, you do have to be careful. You can overdo it, which is true of anytime you employ cross-hatching in your illustration. So you just have to be aware of what is too much. Just by constantly zooming in and out of your illustration, that's a great way for you to see if you're just adding a bunch of unnecessary lines, or if you're actually improving or adding more information into your illustration. And so you can see here, and this is something that it took me a while to sort of be comfortable with, or to realize on my own, is that just because you're at the inking phase doesn't mean you stop edit the foundations of your drawing. So if you notice that shapes are off, or if you notice that your alignments aren't working, just go ahead, make those changes. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to stop and go back to your sketch layer. You can use the opportunity of just improving that just directly on the inking stage, which is something that's only actually really true with digital inks. If you were working in more traditional medium, you would probably have to grab a post-it note, cover that area, and rework the sketch, so just so you know what you're working with within that area, and then maybe use a light board to go back and ink on top of that post-it note. But when you're working with digital inks, you can sort of figure out those things at the inking stage. However, I do want to caution you, if you do that, you might run into the habit of just constantly stopping your workflow to reshape your drawing. It's always a good practice just to do as much as you can at the sketch stage. It just makes your inking phase of the illustration just that much easier. But I just wanted to point out, just because you're at the inking stage doesn't mean you sort of shut your brain off and you stop being critical of your drawing. You should always be just sort of reassessing and reevaluating your illustration. So you see me using the eraser tool or the transparent color in the inking brush as a way to sort of clean up some of those tangents and some of those intersecting lines that I left before. I find it's much easier to do that at this stage rather than try to be super careful with it throughout the entire drawing experience. So that's just a preference, and it's something that I noticed that sped up my experience, but it might be different for you. Unfortunately, I didn't realize it until it was much too late, but my camera stopped recording me as I was in the middle of this drawing session. So we're coming up to the end of the video. I was hoping I would capture the entire process on camera for you, but unfortunately, just a bonehead mistake, wasn't able to capture that. But here's the drawing in its entirety. This is a quick inking of female Supergirl. If you guys like this video, please go ahead and hit that like button. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. And until next time, keep drawing.